A dying man's grip tightened around her wrist. Blood soaked through the expensive fabric of his suit, pooling on the hospital floor. "Tell Dante Varelli," he gasped, eyes wide with terror. "The contract still stands. Tell him I kept my word." The name sent ice through Lena Carter's veins. Everyone knew that name. Everyone feared it, but she had no idea that within 48 hours, she would be sitting across from the man himself, the most dangerous figure in the city, listening to a proposal that would either save her brother's life or destroy her own. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Now, let's begin. What? The fluorescent lights in Metro General's emergency wing had been flickering for 3 weeks. Lena Carter had stopped filing maintenance requests after the first 5 went ignored. Budget cuts, they said. Prioritization, they called it. She called it what it was. Slow institutional collapse, the kind that happened when people stopped caring because caring cost too much. Her shift had started 14 hours ago. Her feet screamed inside her worn sneakers, the left one developing a hole near the toe that she'd been ignoring for 2 months. New shoes cost money. Money went to other things, more important things. "Nurse Carter, incoming trauma. ETA, 2 minutes. Lena grabbed a fresh pair of gloves from the dispenser, her movements automatic after 6 years of emergency nursing. The exhaustion was bone deep, but her hands stayed steady. They always did when it mattered. The ambulance arrived in a chaos of sirens and shouting. 2 paramedics wheeled in a gurney carrying a man in an expensive suit now ruined with blood. Mid-40s, gunshot wound to the abdomen, already showing signs of shock. What happened? Lena cut away the jacket with practiced efficiency, exposing the wound. Found him in an alley off 7th. No ID. He keeps talking about someone named Varelli. The name registered somewhere in the back of her mind, but she had no time to process it. The next 20 minutes blurred into controlled emergency, establishing lines, stopping the bleeding, stabilizing vitals that wanted to crash despite everything she did. "You're going to be fine," she told him, though she wasn't sure it was true. "Stay with me. What's your name?" His eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. "Marcus. Marcus Chen." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "You have to tell him. Tell Dante Varelli the contract still stands. Tell him I kept my word. Save your strength. Don't try to talk." "You don't understand." Blood flecked his lips. "If he thinks I broke faith, my family." "Please." "I'll tell him," Lena said, though she had no idea how she would do that or why she was making promises to a dying man. "I promise." His grip loosened. The monitors sang their flatline song. Marcus Chen died at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, leaving behind a blood-soaked Armani suit, no identification, and a message for a man whose name sent whispers through the emergency room after Lena mentioned it to the attending physician. "Dante Varelli?" Dr. Patterson's face had gone carefully blank. "You're sure that's what he said?" "Yes. Why?" "No reason. Just be careful who you mention that name to." Lena went home to her cramped apartment at 2 a.m., too tired to shower, too wired to sleep. She found her brother Danny sprawled on the couch, laptop open, looking thinner than he had last week. "You're up late," she said. "Couldn't sleep." He closed the laptop quickly, too quickly. "Danny, it's fine." "Show me." The argument was brief because Danny was too tired to fight, and Lena was too stubborn to back down. The laptop revealed what she'd feared. More medical bills, more collection notices, more zeros than she could handle on a nurse's salary. Danny's leukemia had been in remission for 8 months. The bills from treatment would follow them for years. She'd taken extra shifts, sold everything she owned that had value, maxed out 2 credit cards. It still wasn't enough. "I can defer the payments," Danny said. He was 19 and trying to sound older. "Talk to them about a payment plan or something." "You're not deferring anything. You're going to college like we planned." "Lena, we can't afford—" "I'll figure it out." She always said that. She had no idea how to make it true anymore. Sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of blood on white linoleum and a dying man's grip, and a name that felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. The next morning brought coffee that tasted like burned plastic and a text from the hospital asking if she could cover another shift. She agreed because she always did. The extra money might buy groceries for the week. She was 3 hours into that shift when two men in dark suits walked into the emergency wing and asked for her by name. Lena Carter? Something in their posture set off alarm bells. Too straight, too controlled. These weren't cops. Can I help you? Mr. Varelli would like to speak with you. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Around her, the usual chaos of the emergency room seemed to pause. Other nurses found reasons to move away. I'm working, Lena said. Mr. Varelli doesn't extend invitations lightly. The taller one, granite-faced, maybe 35, spoke without inflection. He's sent a car. Your supervisor has already approved your early departure. I didn't ask for early departure. Nevertheless. Lena looked at the other nurses. No one met her eyes. Whatever power Dante Varelli held in this city, it reached into places she hadn't imagined. I need to change. The car will wait. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room with shaking hands. This was insane. This was dangerous. Marcus Chen had died with that name on his lips, terrified enough to grab a stranger and extract promises. Whatever world Dante Varelli occupied, it wasn't one where people like her belonged. But she'd made a promise to a dying man. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it was just her own stubbornness refusing to let her walk away. The car was a black Mercedes with windows tinted dark enough to be illegal. Lena climbed into the back seat between the two suited men and tried not to think about how easily she could disappear. They drove in silence through downtown, into neighborhoods where buildings got taller and cleaner and further from anything she recognized. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a high-rise that probably cost more per floor than her entire apartment building was worth. This way. Private elevator. Keycard access. A scent that made her ears pop. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city sprawling in every direction. The space was minimalist in a way that spoke of intentional design rather than lack of funds. Expensive furniture arranged with precise care, art on the walls that probably had names she wouldn't recognize. And in the center of the room, facing those massive windows with his back to her, was a man in a wheelchair. Miss Carter, thank you for coming. Dante Varelli turned to face her, and Lena found herself staring at a man who didn't match her expectations. She'd pictured someone older, harder, marked by violence. Instead, she saw someone around 35, dark hair starting to show threads of gray at the temples, features that would have been handsome without the weight of exhaustion carved into them. His eyes were what stopped her, dark and assessing, but not cold. Tired, maybe. Guarded. I didn't realize I had a choice, Lena said. You always have a choice, though I prefer when people choose to accept my invitations. He gestured to a chair across from him. Please, sit. She sat because her legs felt unsteady, and because refusing seemed pointless now. Marcus Chen died in your emergency room last night, Dante said. You were with him at the end. Yes. He said something to you. It wasn't a question. Lena wondered how he knew. Cameras in the hospital? Someone on staff reporting to him? The reach of his influence was becoming clearer by the moment. He wanted me to give you a message, Lena said. He said to tell you the contract still stands, that he kept his word. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not grief exactly, but a kind of weariness that suggested loss was familiar territory. Marcus was loyal, he said quietly. That's rare. Who killed him? Does it matter to you? He died in my hands, so yes, it matters. Dante studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. You're direct. I appreciate that. It saves time. I didn't come here to save you time. I came because your people didn't give me much choice. I delivered the message. Can I leave now? Not yet. He moved the wheelchair closer. The motion was smooth, controlled. Whatever had put him in that chair, he'd adapted to it with the same precision that seemed to govern everything else about him. I have a proposition for you. I'm not interested in whatever business you're involved in. It's not that kind of proposition. I need a wife. The statement hung in the air between them, absurd enough that Lena almost laughed. Excuse me? A wife. 1-year contract. Compensation sufficient to solve your financial problems. All of them. You're insane. I'm practical. My situation has changed recently. He gestured to the wheelchair without self-pity. An accident 6 months ago. I survived, but the injury was permanent. In my line of work, that kind of weakness invites challenges. People begin to question whether I can still lead effectively. So get married for real if you need to project strength. Marriage in my world is complicated. It creates alliances, obligations, expectations that outlast temporary needs. I need the appearance of stability without the permanent entanglement. A contract marriage solves that problem. And you picked me why? Because I happened to be in the room when Marcus Chen died? I picked you because Marcus trusted you enough to give you his final message. Because you're drowning in medical debt for your brother but still working extra shifts instead of cutting corners. Because everyone I've had research, you says you're reliable, discreet, and desperate enough to consider an offer you'd otherwise refuse. The casual invasion of her privacy should have made her angry. Instead, she felt a strange kind of relief that he wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was, a transaction based on mutual need. How much? Lena asked. Dante named a figure that made her stomach drop. That's impossible. It's what I'm offering. 1 year. You live here, appear at my side for public events, maintain the appearance of a marriage. In exchange, your brother's medical bills disappear. His college tuition gets paid. You walk away after 12 months with enough money to start over however you choose. Why would you pay that much? Because what I'm buying is worth it. Stability, legitimacy, the assurance that my organization won't fracture while I'm perceived as vulnerable. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to love me, Miss Carter. I'm offering you a business arrangement that solves both our problems. Lena's mind raced through implications, consequences, dangers she couldn't fully articulate. This was crazy. This was a man who lived in a world where people died in alleys and loyalty was measured in blood. Getting involved with him, even temporarily, even under contract, was stepping into darkness she couldn't navigate. But Danny's medical bills were real. The collection calls were real. The slow drowning in debt that would follow them for decades was real. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and I find someone else. And if I say no, then you say no. You go back to your life. Nothing changes. He met her eyes steadily. But we both know you can't afford for nothing to change. The truth of it sat between them like a third presence. Lena stood, her legs more steady now despite everything. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. The car will bring you back at the same time. One way or another, we'll resolve this quickly. The drive back to the hospital passed in a blur. Lena worked the rest of her shift in a daze, going through motions while her mind spun through impossible scenarios. She went home to find Danny cooking pasta, cheap pasta that would be their dinner for the next 3 nights, and had to physically stop herself from telling him everything. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, weighing her life against a stranger's offer. Marriage to a man she didn't know. A year of her life in a world she didn't understand. The possibility of danger she couldn't predict. Against that, Danny healthy. Danny in college. Bills paid. Freedom from the weight that had been crushing her for 2 years. She thought about Marcus Chen's last words. About the terror in his eyes when he talked about his family. About the kind of man who inspired that much fear even from beyond the grave. She thought about Dante Varelli in his wheelchair, offering an obscene amount of money for something as simple as appearing beside him. Nothing about this was simple, but maybe nothing about her life had been simple for a long time. When the car arrived the next evening, Lena was ready. She climbed in with the same 2 suited men and rode the same elevator to the same penthouse where Dante waited by the same floor-to-ceiling windows. Miss Carter, I have conditions, Lena said without preamble. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Of course you do. I want the contract in writing, every detail, what you expect, what I receive, what happens if either of us breaks the terms. Agreed. I want my own space in this penthouse, my own room, my own privacy. You'll have the entire East Wing. I rarely leave the West Side. I keep my job at the hospital. I'm not giving up my career for this. Dante hesitated. That could complicate things. The wife of Dante Varelli working as a nurse raises questions. I don't care what questions it raises. I'm not losing myself completely in this arrangement. I keep my job or the deal's off. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Part-time. Reduced hours. That's the compromise. Fine. Any other conditions? This is business, just business. I need you to be clear about that. Crystal clear, Dante said. I'm not looking for love, Miss Carter. I'm looking for a solution to a problem. You'll be compensated generously for providing that solution. Nothing more. Then we have a deal. He extended his hand. Lena shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip despite the wheelchair. This was real. This was happening. My lawyer will have the contracts ready tomorrow, Dante said. Read them carefully. Change anything you need to change. Once we both sign, the arrangement begins immediately. How immediately? There's a charity gala Friday night. You'll attend as my fiancé. We'll announce the engagement publicly. The wedding follows 2 weeks later. 2 weeks? Long enough to seem legitimate, short enough that we don't waste time on unnecessary theatrics. Lena's head spun. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford new shoes. Now she was agreeing to marry a man whose name made doctors flinch and whose world operated by rules she didn't understand. I should go, she said. I have a shift tomorrow. The car will take you home. And Miss Carter? She paused at the elevator. Thank you, Dante said quietly. I know this isn't easy. I'll try to make it as painless as possible. Just keep your end of the contract, that's all I need. But as the elevator descended and the city lights blurred past the windows, Lena wondered if that was true. She'd agreed to this for Danny, for the bills, for the chance to stop drowning. She told herself it was just business, just a year of her life in exchange for financial freedom. She hadn't considered what it would mean to live beside a man like Dante Varelli, to see him daily, to stand at his side in front of crowds who would judge every gesture, every word, every moment of their fabricated relationship. She hadn't considered that the hardest contracts to keep might be the ones you made with yourself. The contracts arrived the next morning via courier, thick legal documents that spelled out every detail of their arrangement in precise, unforgiving language. Lena read them 3 times, made notes, changed 2 clauses about her personal autonomy, and signed her name at the bottom with a hand that only shook a little. Danny noticed the papers. What's all that? Legal stuff. Don't worry about it. Lena. I got a new opportunity, a position that pays better. We're going to be okay now. She hated lying to him. But the truth was too complicated, too dangerous. Better to let him think she'd found a better job than to explain she'd sold a year of her life to a man whose business was built on foundations she didn't want to examine too closely. Friday arrived faster than she'd expected. A team of stylists descended on her apartment in the morning, hair, makeup, wardrobe, all arranged by Dante's people. They transformed her into someone she barely recognized, elegant and polished in a way that felt like wearing someone else's skin. The dress was midnight blue, simple but expensive, the kind of garment that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Jewelry that probably cost more than her annual salary. Shoes that actually fit, butter-soft leather that made her worn sneakers seem like artifacts from another life. You look beautiful, Danny said, staring. It's just for work. A big event. Another lie. They were piling up. The car arrived at 7. Dante waited in the back, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her rent. He looked different than he had in the penthouse. More alert, more present. This was his armor, she realized. The public face he wore to hide whatever vulnerabilities existed underneath. You clean up well, he said. So do you. The gala was being held at the Meridian Hotel, all marble and crystal, and people dripping with money. Lena had never been to an event like this. The closest she'd come was a hospital fundraiser where the champagne was cheap and the hors d'oeuvres came from Costco. This was different. This was a world where everything cost more than it should, and everyone smiled with teeth that had been professionally whitened. Dante's arrival caused a ripple of awareness through the crowd. People turned, whispered, rearranged themselves into social configurations that accounted for his presence. The wheelchair didn't seem to diminish his impact. If anything, it made him more interesting. The wounded king still commanding his court. Stay close, he murmured to Lena. Smile. Let me do most of the talking. She stayed close. She smiled. She let him guide her through a maze of introductions and small talk that all felt vaguely threatening despite the polite words. Dante, I heard you were engaged. I had to see for myself. The woman who spoke was around 40, elegant in the way that suggested both money and good genes. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Victoria, Allow me to introduce Lena Carter, my fiancée. Charmed. Victoria's gaze raked over Lena with barely concealed assessment. And what do you do, dear? I'm a nurse. How practical. The condescension was deliberate. Lena felt her spine straighten, ready to defend herself, but Dante's hand settled on her arm, a gentle warning. Lena has dedicated her life to helping people, he said smoothly. I find that far more admirable than most occupations in this room. Victoria's smile tightened. Of course. How wonderful for you both. She drifted away, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and subtle hostility. Friend of yours? Lena asked. Business associate. She hoped to arrange a marriage between her daughter and me before the accident. My engagement disrupted those plans. So I'm ruining lives already. Great start. You're doing exactly what I need you to do, which is stand here and make it clear I'm not available for political marriages or power plays. The evening continued in the same vein, endless introductions, careful conversations, smiles that hid calculations Lena could only partially understand. She watched Dante navigate it all with practiced ease, never showing weakness, never letting the wheelchair define his presence. But she also saw the cost, the tightness around his eyes that suggested pain he was ignoring, the way his hand gripped the wheelchair controls a little harder than necessary, the careful way he positioned himself to avoid being looked down upon. You're hurting, she said quietly during a rare moment alone. I'm fine. I'm a nurse. I can see you're not fine. I said I'm fine. The snap in his voice made her step back. This was the other side of Dante Virelli, the part that didn't accept vulnerability, that treated pain as weakness to be hidden rather than addressed. Suit yourself, Lena said. They didn't speak again for the rest of the evening. The car ride back to the penthouse was silent. Dante stared out the window, jaw tight, radiating tension he wouldn't acknowledge. Lena was too tired to push. This was his world, his rules. She was just here to play a part. But when they reached the penthouse and he started toward his wing without a word, something in her rebelled against the cold distance. We can't do this for a year, she said. He stopped, turned. Do what? Pretend we're strangers, snap at each other, act like this is some kind of prison sentence we're both enduring. What do you suggest? I don't know, but maybe try being civil, maybe acknowledge that we're stuck with each other and might as well make it bearable. Dante's expression was unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, then quietly, You're right. I apologize. Tonight was difficult. Because of the pain or because of the people? Both. Lena moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched into his features. Can I help? I don't need help. I know you don't need it. I'm asking if I can offer it anyway. Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or suspicion. He wasn't used to offers that came without strings. The pain medication is in the bathroom, he said finally. But I'm out. Show me what you need. I'll pick it up tomorrow. You don't have to. I'm a nurse, remember? Let me do what I'm trained for. He showed her to his room, sparse, functional, nothing that revealed anything personal about him. The medication list was straightforward. Muscle relaxants, anti-inflammatories, something for nerve pain. She made notes on her phone, already mentally calculating dosages and interaction warnings. Thank you, Dante said. It's not a favor. It's part of keeping you functional enough to maintain this arrangement. But that wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. Over the next few days, a strange routine emerged. Lena moved into the East Wing, a space that felt too large and too empty for someone used to a cramped apartment. She kept her shifts at the hospital, reduced to part-time as agreed. She managed Dante's medication, made sure he was eating properly, noticed the small signs of pain he tried to hide. They were careful with each other, polite, distant in a way that felt safer than actual proximity. But proximity was inevitable in shared space. She found him late one night in the living room, staring out at the city with an expression that looked like loneliness. She almost turned away, respected the privacy, but something stopped her. Can't sleep? She asked. Old habit. I don't sleep much anymore. Because of the pain? Among other things. Lena sat on the couch, far enough away to give him space. Do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. They sat in silence, watching the city lights blur and shift. After a while, Dante spoke. The accident wasn't really an accident. Someone tried to kill me. They failed, but they accomplished enough. I'm sorry. Don't be. It comes with the territory. I made choices that put me in this position. I don't get to complain about the consequences. That's a bleak way to look at it. It's realistic. Lena studied his profile in the dim light. Do you regret it? The life you've built? Sometimes. But regret doesn't change anything. You live with what you've created. Even if it's killing you? He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something raw beneath the control. We're all dying, Miss Carter. Some of us just do it faster than others. Lena, if we're going to be married, you should probably use my first name. Lena. He tested it, the syllables careful on his tongue. You can call me Dante. I know. Another silence, but this one felt different. Less careful, more honest. Why did you really agree to this? Dante asked. I know the money matters, but you're not the type who sells herself cheap. There had to be more. Lena considered lying. Considered giving him the simple answer about Danny and medical bills. But something about the late hour and the darkness and the way he'd let his guard slip made her want to offer truth in return. My brother had leukemia. He's in remission now, but the treatment destroyed us financially. I've been working myself to death trying to keep us afloat, and it's still not enough. Your offer was the first thing in 2 years that felt like hope instead of just drowning. She paused. I'm not proud of it, selling a year of my life for money. But I'm practical enough to know that sometimes survival means compromising on ideals. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Tell me that in a year when this is over and I'm trying to figure out who I am without this contract defining me. You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think. How would you know? Because weak people don't survive in my world, and you're still here. The conversation drifted into other topics, small things, inconsequential things that felt important in the space they were creating between them. Lena learned he'd grown up poor, built his empire from nothing. He learned she'd always wanted to be a doctor but settled for nursing when her parents died and left her responsible for Danny. They talked until the sky started to lighten, until exhaustion finally caught up with them both. When Lena stood to go to her room, Dante caught her hand. Thank you, he said, for tonight, for treating me like a person instead of a contract. Same to you. She went to bed as the city woke up, feeling something she hadn't expected, the first fragile thread of connection to the man she'd agreed to spend a year beside. The wedding approached with uncomfortable speed. Plans were made by people Lena never met, decisions rendered about flowers and venues and guest lists. She was measured for a dress she'd wear once, fitted for shoes she'd probably never touch again. Danny grew suspicious. You're different, he said one morning over breakfast. Something's going on. Nothing's going on. You're lying. You're bad at it. She'd always been bad at it, but the truth was too complicated, too dangerous. I'm getting married, she said finally. Danny stared. What? It's fast, I know, but I met someone and it feels right, and I need you to trust me on this. Who? When? Why didn't you tell me? His name is Dante. We met through work, and I didn't tell you because I knew you'd worry. Of course I'm worried. You've been killing yourself with work for 2 years, and suddenly you're getting married to someone I've never heard of. Danny, is this about the bills? Did you do something stupid because of me? The accuracy of his question hit too close. Lena forced herself to meet his eyes, to sell the lie with enough conviction that he'd believe it. This is about me finding someone who makes me happy. The money is just a bonus. Can you please just be happy for me? He wanted to argue. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the frustration in his eyes. But Danny was 19 and still trusted that his sister wouldn't destroy her life for him. Fine, he said, but I want to meet him before the wedding. Of course. She'd worry about that later. The day of the wedding arrived with surreal inevitability. Lena stood in a room at the Meridian Hotel, wearing a dress that probably cost more than her car, surrounded by stylists and coordinators who treated her like a very expensive doll being prepared for display. You look stunning, one of them said. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged in Dante's world. The transformation was unsettling. A knock on the door revealed one of Dante's security team. 5 minutes, Mrs. Varelli. The name sent a shock through her. Mrs. Varelli. That was her now. For the next year, that was who she'd pretend to be. The ceremony was small despite the venue's grandeur. 50 guests, all carefully selected from Dante's business and social circles. No one from Lena's life except Danny, who sat in the front row looking confused and worried. Dante waited at the altar in his wheelchair, dressed in a dark suit that made him look both powerful and vulnerable. When Lena walked down the aisle, his expression shifted into something she couldn't read. The ceremony was brief, traditional vows that felt hollow despite being spoken out loud. When the officiant pronounced them married and Dante leaned forward to kiss her, it was chaste, careful, a public seal on a private contract. The reception was more of the same elaborate pretense, champagne and small talk and smiles that hid calculations. Lena played her part, stood beside Dante, accepted congratulations from people who probably saw through the whole arrangement but were too polite to say so. It was done. She was married. The contract had begun. That night, back at the penthouse, they stood on opposite sides of the living room, like strangers who'd accidentally wandered into the same space. "Well," Lena said, "we did it. We did. 1 year. 1 year." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. This was supposed to be simple. A business transaction. 2 people using each other for mutual benefit. But Lena was starting to realize that nothing about Dante Varelli would ever be simple. And as she walked to her wing of the penthouse, leaving her husband alone by the windows, she wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst mistake she'd never be able to undo. The first week of marriage was an exercise in careful avoidance. They occupied the same space but lived separate lives, passing each other in hallways with polite nods, sharing occasional meals in silence that felt deliberate rather than comfortable. Dante worked from his office in the West Wing, handling business Lena didn't ask about. She kept her reduced hospital shifts, grateful for the escape into a world that made sense. Danny had moved into a better apartment, something Lena had arranged quietly, explaining it away as part of her new job's benefits package. The lie sat heavy in her stomach every time she visited him, every time he asked innocent questions about her marriage that she deflected with practiced vagueness. "You seem tired," Danny said one afternoon, studying her across the table at his new place. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Just adjusting." "To what?" "You won't tell me anything about your life anymore." "There's nothing to tell. I work, I come home, I sleep, same as always. Except now you come home to some guy I've met once for 15 minutes at your wedding, a guy who looked at you like you were a business acquisition, not his wife." The accuracy stung. Lena stood, gathering her things. "I need to go." "Lena, wait, I'll call you later." She left before he could push harder, before the careful walls she'd built around the truth could crack. Back at the penthouse, she found Dante in the living room with 2 men she recognized from the wedding. One was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested he'd seen things that would break most people. The other was younger, sharp-eyed, and quiet in a way that felt dangerous. The conversation stopped when she entered. "I'm sorry," Lena said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Dante said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Lena, this is Vincent Romano and Carlo Messina. Gentlemen, my wife." The word still sounded strange in his mouth, like he was testing it out, seeing if it fit. Vincent stood, offered his hand with old-world courtesy. "A pleasure to finally meet you properly, Mrs. Varelli. Call me Lena." "Lena." He smiled, but his eyes were assessing her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Dante's told us very little about you. He's being quite protective." "There's not much to tell." "I doubt that's true." Carlo didn't stand, didn't offer his hand. He just watched her with those sharp eyes, like he was cataloging every detail for later use. "We should finish this discussion another time," Dante said, his voice carrying an edge that suggested it wasn't really a suggestion. Vincent picked up on the dismissal. "Of course. We'll be in touch." He nodded to Lena. "Welcome to the family." The words felt like a threat disguised as courtesy. After they left, silence settled over the room like dust. Lena stood by the door, uncertain whether to stay or retreat to her wing. "You can ask," Dante said without looking at her. "Ask what?" "Whatever questions you're holding back." "I don't have any questions." "You're a terrible liar." Lena moved into the room, keeping distance between them. "Fine. Who were they really?" "Business associates." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I'm giving you." "Right. Because I'm just the wife for show, not actually part of your life. Dante's jaw tightened. You knew what this was when you agreed to it. I did. But that doesn't make it less isolating to live in your home and have no idea what actually happens in it. You don't want to know what happens in it. Maybe not. But the not knowing makes me feel like I'm living in a stranger's house, which I guess I am. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Vincent runs the financial side of my organization. Carlo handles security and enforcement. They came today because there's been movement from rival factions. People testing boundaries, seeing if my injury makes me vulnerable. That's what happens in my world, Lena. Constant pressure, constant threats. I keep you separate from it because that's the deal. You get the money, the security, the solved problems. You don't get the darkness that comes with them. The honesty surprised her. She looked at him, really looked, and saw exhaustion that went deeper than physical pain. Does it ever stop? She asked. The pressure? No, it just becomes background noise. That sounds lonely. It's practical. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Dante's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. You don't give up, do you? Not usually. It's a character flaw. It's not a flaw. The moment stretched between them, fragile and strange. Then Dante's phone rang, shattering whatever connection had been forming. He glanced at the screen, his face going carefully blank. I need to take this. Lena left him to his call and his secrets, retreating to her wing where everything felt temporary and borrowed. She'd been here 2 weeks and still hadn't unpacked completely, as if some part of her refused to accept this as real. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. They needed her to cover a shift tomorrow, emergency staffing shortage. She agreed immediately, grateful for the excuse to escape the increasingly claustrophobic feeling of the penthouse. The shift started at 6 a.m. She left before Dante was awake, catching a car service rather than asking his driver. The hospital welcomed her back like an old friend. Familiar chaos, familiar faces, familiar problems she actually knew how to solve. Heard you got married, one of the other nurses said during a rare quiet moment. To some wealthy guy. Is it true? It's true. And you're still working here. Must be love. Lena forced a smile. Must be. The day blurred into typical emergency room chaos. A construction accident, a heart attack, 2 car crashes, a kid who'd swallowed a toy. She fell into the rhythm of it gratefully, letting the work drown out everything else. She was closing up a laceration when her phone rang. Dante's name on the screen made her stomach tighten. I'm working, she answered. I know. Vincent wants to have dinner with us tonight, both of us. It's important. I'm on shift until 8. I'll send the car at 8:30. Wear something formal. He hung up before she could argue. The rest of the shift dragged with new weight. She'd managed to keep her 2 worlds mostly separate, the hospital where she was just Lena and the penthouse where she played Mrs. Varelli. Having them collide felt dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. The car arrived exactly at 8:30. She climbed in still wearing scrubs, too tired to care about appearances. At the penthouse, she found a dress already laid out on her bed, deep red, elegant, expensive. A note in Dante's handwriting. This should work for tonight. The presumption should have annoyed her. Instead, she felt a strange flutter of something that might have been appreciation for the practical gesture. She showered quickly, put on the dress, did minimal makeup. The woman in the mirror looked polished and put together, nothing like the exhausted nurse who'd spent 12 hours running between trauma bays. Dante waited by the elevator, already dressed for dinner. His eyes tracked over her appearance with an expression she couldn't read. You look tired, he said. 12-hour shift will do that. You didn't have to take it. Yes, I did. We had a deal. The deal was part-time work, not killing yourself to prove a point. I'm not proving anything. I'm doing my job. They rode the elevator down in tense silence. The restaurant was the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance and the menu didn't list prices. Vincent was already there, seated at a private table in the back corner where conversations wouldn't carry. Lana, you look lovely. He stood, pulling out her chair with practiced courtesy that felt more calculated than genuine. Thank you. Dante positioned his wheelchair at the head of the table, creating a triangle between the 3 of them. A server appeared immediately with wine that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent. I hope you don't mind me requesting this dinner, Vincent said after they'd ordered. I wanted a chance to get to know the woman who captured Dante's heart. The phrasing was deliberate. A test, maybe, to see how she'd react. I'm not that interesting, Lena said. I doubt that. Dante doesn't make impulsive decisions. Your marriage was quite sudden. When you know, you know. She reached over, placed her hand on Dante's. The gesture felt strange, performative, but his fingers closed around hers with surprising warmth. Indeed, Vincent sipped his wine, watching them over the rim of the glass. I've known Dante for 20 years. Watched him build everything from nothing. He's always been focused, driven. Romance seemed like a distraction he couldn't afford. People change, Dante said quietly. They do, though usually not without reason. Vincent's attention shifted fully to Lena. Tell me about yourself. Dante's been remarkably tight-lipped about your background. There's not much to tell. I'm a nurse. I work at Metro General. I take care of people. How noble. And your family? Just my brother. Our parents died when I was young. I'm sorry to hear that. It must have been difficult. The sympathy felt false, but Lena nodded anyway. We managed. I'm sure you did. You strike me as someone who's good at managing difficult situations. The conversation continued in the same vein, polite questions that felt like interrogation, careful answers that revealed nothing important. Lena felt like she was being evaluated, measured against some standard she didn't understand. Dante remained mostly quiet, letting Vincent drive the conversation, but watching everything with that same careful assessment he applied to the world. When dessert arrived, Vincent finally got to what felt like his real purpose. I'm glad Dante found you, he said. The accident was difficult for all of us. There were concerns about leadership, stability. Your marriage helps address those concerns. I'm happy to hear that, Lena said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to. Of course, maintaining that stability requires certain appearances, public unity, visible partnership. I hope you understand how important that is. I understand. Good. Because there are people who would love to see Dante fail, who would exploit any weakness, any crack in the foundation. Your role in preventing that can't be overstated. The weight of his words settled over the table. This wasn't just dinner. It was a reminder that she'd stepped into something bigger than a simple contract. She was part of maintaining power structures she barely understood. Lena knows what's expected, Dante said, his voice carrying an edge. You don't need to spell it out. I'm simply being clear. Clarity prevents misunderstandings. We're clear. Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Excellent. Then I'll let you two enjoy the rest of your evening. He left them with the check and a feeling of unease Lena couldn't shake. I'm sorry about that, Dante said once they were alone. Vincent can be direct. Was that a threat? It felt like a threat. It was a reminder that you're not just my wife, you're a symbol of stability in an unstable situation. And if I mess that up, don't. The simplicity of the answer was more frightening than elaboration would have been. They drove back to the penthouse in silence. Lena's exhaustion had deepened into something that felt like bone weariness. She wanted to sleep for a week, wake up in her old life where the biggest problem was affording groceries. But that life was gone. She'd traded it for this: expensive dresses and dangerous dinners, and a husband who looked at her like she was both solution and complication. You should rest, Dante said when they reached the penthouse. You look ready to collapse. I'm fine. You keep saying that. It's still not true. Lena turned to face him, too tired to maintain careful distance. What do you want me to say? That this is hard? That I'm in over my head? That I have no idea what I'm doing or how to navigate your world? I want you to be honest. Fine. I'm terrified. I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm playing a role in a script I haven't read, and everyone else knows their lines except me. Happy? No, but at least it's real. What about you? Are you ever real, or is everything just strategy and control? The question hung between them, too raw to ignore. Dante's hands tightened on the wheelchair controls. I don't have the luxury of being real. Too many people depend on me maintaining the image. That sounds exhausting. It is. So what do you do when you can't maintain it anymore? I haven't figured that out yet. The admission surprised her. It was the most vulnerable thing he'd said since they'd met. Lena moved closer, close enough to see the fatigue carved into his features. You don't have to maintain it with me, not when we're alone. That's dangerous. Why? Because if I stop maintaining it, I'm not sure what's left underneath. The honesty was stark, unguarded. Lena recognized it because she felt the same way, like they were both playing parts that had become more real than whatever existed beneath.
Maybe that's okay, she said quietly. Maybe we're both allowed to not have all the answers. That's not how my life works. Maybe it should be. Dante looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he reached out, took her hand, not for show, not for cameras or witnesses, just because the space between them felt too wide. Thank you, he said, for tonight, for playing the part even when Vincent was pushing. It's what you're paying me for.
It's more than that. You didn't just play the part. You made it believable. Maybe that's the problem. She pulled her hand away, needing distance before she said something she couldn't take back. This was a contract, a transaction. Getting confused about that would only make everything harder. I'm going to bed, she said. Lena, good night, Dante. She left him there, alone by the windows where he seemed to spend so much time. In her room, she stripped off the expensive dress and collapsed onto the bed, too tired to even brush her teeth. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind spun through the evening, through Vincent's careful threats, and Dante's rare honesty, and the feeling that she was walking a tightrope she hadn't known existed when she signed the contract. The next few weeks fell into an uneasy rhythm. More public appearances, a gallery opening, a charity auction, a political fundraiser where everyone smiled and lied with equal facility. Lena learned to navigate the social landscape, to deflect invasive questions, to stand beside Dante with the right mix of devotion and independence. At the hospital, she clung to normalcy. Her coworkers asked fewer questions as time passed, accepting her marriage as just another fact of her life. She was grateful for their lack of curiosity. Danny grew more distant. He called less, answered her texts with single-word responses. When she finally confronted him about it, his anger surprised her. You're different, he said. Ever since you married him, you've been different. I'm still the same person. No, you're not. You're playing some role I don't understand, and you won't tell me the truth about any of it. What truth do you want? I got married. That changes things. It changes everything. You've been lying to me about something, and I can't figure out what. But I know you, Lena. I know when you're hiding something. She wanted to tell him, wanted to explain the contract, the arrangement, the desperate decision she'd made to save them both. But the words wouldn't come. I'm not hiding anything, she said. Then why does it feel like I'm losing my sister? The question broke something in her. She reached for him, but he stepped back. I need some space, he said. Figure out what you're doing. Then maybe we can talk. He left her standing in his apartment, surrounded by furniture she'd paid for with money that came from a lie. That night, she came home to find Dante in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand and something defeated in his posture. Bad day? She asked. Carlo was shot this afternoon. He'll live, but it was close. Lena sat down without thinking about it, close enough to offer presence without crowding. I'm sorry. It's the business. People get hurt, people die. You accept it, or you get out. And you can't get out. No. Why not? Because I built this. Because people depend on me. Because walking away would create a power vacuum that would get more people killed than staying ever will. That's a lot of weight to carry. It's the choice I made. Lena studied him in the dim light. Do you ever regret it? Every day, but regret doesn't change anything. It could, if you wanted it to. I'm too deep. There's no clean exit from this life. There's always an exit. You just might not like the cost. Dante looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like longing. What would you do if you were me? I'd find something worth more than power, and I'd choose it instead. That's naive. Maybe, but at least it's honest. He smiled, tired and sad. You're good at that. Being honest when everyone else is performing. Someone has to be. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that had become easier as weeks passed. Lena found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she didn't want to examine too closely. Danny thinks I'm lying to him, she said quietly. He's right, but I can't tell him the truth. Why not? Because it would hurt him, knowing I did this for him, that I sold a year of my life to solve problems he blames himself for. He'd never forgive himself. Or you. Or me. Dante reached over, his hand finding hers in the space between them. The touch was becoming familiar, less performative and more reflexive. We're quite a pair, he said, both trapped in situations we created trying to protect people we love. Is that what this is? Protection? Isn't it? Lena wasn't sure anymore. The lines between contract and reality, between performance and genuine feeling, were blurring in ways that scared her. I should go to bed, she said, but she didn't move. You should. Neither of them let go. Dante? Yes? Are we making a mistake, getting too comfortable with this? Probably. But you're not stopping. No? Are you? She should say yes, should pull away, reinforce the boundaries, remember that this was temporary and transactional. But his hand was warm in hers, and his eyes held something that looked like hope, and she was tired of being alone in a crowded life. No, she whispered. I'm not stopping. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but Dante's answering smile suggested he was falling too, and maybe they'd figure out how to land together. Or maybe they'd both crash, and the contract that had brought them together would shatter under the weight of feelings neither of them had planned for. Either way, there was no going back to the careful distance they'd maintained. Something had shifted, something had changed, and Lena couldn't tell if that made everything better or infinitely more complicated. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Morning coffee became something they shared instead of taking separately. Dante started asking about her shifts at the hospital, actually listening when she talked about difficult patients or frustrating bureaucracy. Lena found herself staying up later, drawn to conversations that stretched past midnight and touched on things neither of them had planned to reveal. It was dangerous. They both knew it, but knowing didn't seem to stop either of them. 3 months into the marriage, Dante had a particularly bad pain day. Lena found him in his office at 2 in the afternoon, jaw clenched, hands gripping the desk hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. How long have you been sitting there? She asked from the doorway. I'm working. That's not what I asked. Since 8. 6 hours in the same position, pushing through pain that was clearly overwhelming him. Lena crossed the room, moving around the desk to stand beside him. You need to move. Let me help you. I'm fine. Dante, I can see you're not fine. Let me do my job. Your job is to be my wife, not my nurse. I'm both. Deal with it. The snap in her voice surprised them both. But Dante didn't argue further. He let her help him from the chair to the wheelchair, let her guide him to his room where she could actually assess what was happening. The muscle spasms were bad, the kind that came from pushing too hard for too long. She worked methodically. Heat therapy, gentle manipulation, medication adjusted to account for the severity. He didn't speak while she worked, but she felt the tension slowly releasing under her hands. You can't do this to yourself, she said quietly. Ignoring the pain doesn't make you stronger. It just does more damage. I don't have the luxury of taking breaks. Everyone has that luxury. You just refuse to take it. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're human, Dante, not a machine. Your body has limits. My body has been limiting me for 6 months. I'm tired of accommodating it. The frustration in his voice was raw, unfiltered. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, close enough to see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. You think I don't understand that? I watch patients every day struggle with bodies that won't cooperate, with limitations they never asked for. The ones who survive aren't the ones who push through everything. They're the ones who learn to work with what they have. I'm not your patient. No, you're my husband, which means I get to care about whether you're destroying yourself. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or something softer that he tried to hide. Why do you care? He asked. This is just a contract. I'm paying you to stand next to me at events, not to manage my health. Maybe I'm bad at keeping things transactional. That's going to make the end of this year harder. I know. The admission hung between them, too honest to ignore. They'd both been pretending the growing connection didn't exist, that the careful boundaries they'd established hadn't been eroding for weeks. Lena, don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. She stood, needing distance before she said something that would make everything more complicated. Rest for a few hours? Actually rest.
not just sitting in your office pretending to work. She left before he could argue, retreating to her wing where she could breathe without feeling like the walls were closing in. That evening, she found a note slipped under her door. His handwriting, precise and controlled. "Thank you for earlier. I'm not good at accepting help. I'm trying to be better at it. Such a small thing." But it felt like a shift, an acknowledgement that they were moving past the careful performance into something neither of them had contracted for. The annual Westmore Foundation Gala arrived with the kind of fanfare that made Lena's stomach tight with anxiety. This was the biggest event they'd attended together, 500 guests including politicians, business leaders, and people whose names appeared in newspapers. Dante had explained its importance. This was where power was displayed, where alliances were reinforced, where any sign of weakness would be noted and exploited. "You'll be fine," he said in the car on the way there. "Just stay close. Let me handle the difficult conversations." What counts as difficult? Most of them. The venue was the kind of excessive that made Lena uncomfortable. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, ice sculptures shaped like swans. Women dripped in jewelry that could pay off medical school debt. Men wore tuxedos that cost more than her car used to be worth. Dante's arrival caused the same ripple of awareness she'd noticed before. People turned, assessed, recalibrated. But tonight felt different. The attention was sharper, more predatory. She could feel eyes tracking their movement across the room. "Dante, how wonderful to see you." The man who approached was tall, distinguished, maybe 50, with silver at his temples. His smile was warm, but his eyes were calculating. "Richard, I didn't know you'd be here." "Last-minute decision. I heard you'd be attending with your lovely wife. I had to see for myself." The emphasis on wife felt deliberate. Lena extended her hand, forcing a smile that felt more like armor. "Lena Varelli." "Richard Blackwood. I've known Dante for years. We have overlapping interests." "Richard runs the East Side Development Projects," Dante said, his tone carefully neutral. "Among other things, though I'm sure your husband keeps his business discussions separate from family time." There was an edge there, something that felt like a test. Lena kept her expression pleasant, neutral. "He does. I prefer it that way." "How diplomatic. You've trained her well, Dante." Dante's hand tightened on the wheelchair control. "Lena doesn't require training. She's her own person." "Of course. I meant no offense." Richard's smile widened. "Though I have to say, your marriage was quite a surprise. So sudden. People are still talking about it." "Let them talk." "Oh, they will, especially given certain rumors that have been circulating." The air between them went tense. Lena felt it like a physical thing, the shift from polite conversation to something more dangerous. "What rumors?" Dante's voice was quiet, controlled in a way that felt threatening. "Nothing substantial, just questions about timing, about motivation. You understand how people are, they see a marriage that happens quickly after a life-changing injury, and they wonder about the nature of such arrangements." "Are you questioning the legitimacy of my marriage?" "Not at all. I'm simply noting that questions exist, questions that could be, problematic if left unanswered." Lena felt Dante's tension radiating outward. This wasn't just conversation. This was a power play, a move in a game she didn't fully understand. "Our marriage is no one's business but ours," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Richard's attention shifted to her fully, spoken like a devoted wife. Though devotion can be difficult to prove, can't it? Especially when circumstances suggest alternative explanations. "What are you implying?" "Nothing at all, my dear. I'm simply making conversation." "No, you're not." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "You're making insinuations. If you have something to say it directly, instead of hiding behind polite words." Dante's hand found hers, a warning squeeze, but Richard looked almost pleased by her response. "Direct. I like that." "Very well. There are people who believe your marriage is a business arrangement rather than a love match, that you're being compensated to provide the appearance of stability while Dante navigates his recovery. They think it's a calculated move to prevent challenges to his leadership." "And what do you think?" Lena asked. "I think it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what can be proven. And right now, all anyone can prove is that you appeared in Dante's life very suddenly, married him very quickly,
and benefit substantially from the arrangement. We benefit from each other? That's what marriage is. Indeed, though some marriages are more transactional than others. Dante moved forward slightly, positioning himself between Richard and Lena in a protective gesture that felt automatic. This conversation is over. Of course, I didn't mean to upset you, or your wife. Richard's smile was sharp enough to cut. Enjoy the gala. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. He drifted away into the crowd, leaving tension in his wake. What was that? Lena asked quietly. A warning. Richard wants to expand into territories I control. He's testing whether I'm weak enough to be pushed. By questioning our marriage? By questioning everything. The marriage is just the most visible target. So what do we do? Dante looked at her, something fierce in his expression. We prove him wrong. The rest of the evening was a careful performance. Dante introduced her to dozens of people, his hand never leaving hers. They moved through the crowd like a unit, presenting the image of a couple completely in sync. Lena smiled until her face hurt, made small talk until the words blurred together, stood beside Dante with every appearance of devotion. But she could feel eyes on them constantly, assessing, judging, looking for cracks. During dinner, she was seated next to a woman named Margaret Chen, Marcus's widow, though Lena didn't realize it until the woman introduced herself. You were with my husband when he died, Margaret said quietly, the nurse who promised to deliver his message. Lena's throat went tight. I'm so sorry for your loss. Don't be. Marcus chose his life. He knew the risks. Margaret studied her with eyes that had seen too much grief. Did he suffer? No, it was quick. A lie, but a kind one. Marcus had suffered plenty in those final minutes, but his widow didn't need to carry that weight. Thank you for being with him, for making sure Dante knew about the contract. Marcus was loyal to the end. It would have destroyed him if he'd failed in that. The contract meant that much? Everything meant that much. When you're in this world, loyalty is the only currency that matters. Love, trust, family. It all comes second to proving you won't break. The word settled over Lena like a shroud. This was the world she'd married into, where human connections were measured by their utility, where love was suspect and contracts were sacred. Do you regret it? Lena asked. Marrying into this life? Margaret's smile was sad. Every day. But I loved him, so I stayed. That's what you do when you love someone. You stay, even when it's hard. What if it's not love? What if it's just complicated? Then it's still hard. Maybe harder, because you can't use love as the excuse for why you're putting yourself through it. The observation was too accurate. Lena looked across the table to where Dante was engaged in conversation with a city councilman, his expression controlled and distant. This was his world, power plays and careful alliances, and people like Richard Blackwood, who circled like sharks. She didn't belong here. But she was here anyway, bound by a contract that suddenly felt less like a business arrangement and more like a trap she'd walked into willingly. After dinner, there was dancing. Dante watched couples take the floor with an expression that tried to be neutral but couldn't quite hide the longing. Do you miss it? Lena asked. Dancing? I try not to think about things I can't do anymore. That's not an answer. Yes, I miss it. The honesty surprised her. She stood, moved in front of his wheelchair, extended her hand. Dance with me. Lena, not like them, like us. She took his hands, began moving slowly to the music. It wasn't traditional dancing. She swayed while he held her hands, the wheelchair stationary between them. But it was movement and connection and defiance against the limitations he'd been forced to accept. People noticed. Of course they noticed. The music swelled and Lena closed her eyes, letting herself feel the moment instead of performing it. When the song ended, she opened her eyes to find Dante looking at her with something that made her breath catch. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not treating me like I'm broken. You're not broken. You're just different than you were. That's a generous interpretation. It's the truth. They stayed like that for another song, then another. Other couples gave them space, a small circle of privacy in the crowded room. It should have felt performative, staged for the watching crowd. But it didn't. It felt real in a way that scared her. When they finally returned to their table, Richard Blackwood was watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. The car ride home was quiet. Lena's feet ached from the heels. Her face hurt from smiling. Exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. But she felt something else, too. A strange satisfaction that they'd survived the evening, that they'd presented a united front despite Richard's attempts to undermine them. "You did well tonight," Dante said as they rode the elevator up to the penthouse. "So did you." "I'm used to it. You're not." "I'm learning. Too quickly. You shouldn't have to adapt to this world." "But I am in this world. For 9 more months, anyway." The reminder of the timeline fell between them like a stone. 9 months. Just over half the contract remaining. It should have felt like relief. More than half done. The end in sight. Instead, it felt like a countdown to something Lena wasn't ready for. In the penthouse, Dante headed toward his wing without his usual goodnight. Lena almost let him go. Almost retreated to her own space where she could process the evening alone. But Margaret Chen's words kept circling in her mind. "You stay even when it's hard." "Dante, wait." He stopped, turned. "Tonight was difficult," Lena said. "Richard was trying to get under your skin. Did it work?" "No." "You're lying." A pause, then, "Yes, it worked." "Why?" "Because he's right. Our marriage is transactional. It is a business arrangement. And if people figure that out, everything I've built becomes vulnerable. So we make sure they don't figure it out." "How?" "By pretending harder? Eventually someone will find the contract, or you'll slip up and reveal that you're counting down the days until you can leave. Or I'll—" He stopped, jaw tight. "You'll what?" "Nothing. It doesn't matter." It clearly does matter. Dante's hands gripped the wheelchair controls. "I'll stop being able to pretend that this is just business, that you're just a solution to a problem, that when the year ends and you leave, it won't destroy something I didn't know I still had the capacity to feel." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "You're not the only one who's struggling with that," she said quietly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this stopped being just a contract for me weeks ago. Maybe longer. I'm saying when I stood next to you tonight, I wasn't performing for Richard or anyone else. I was just there. With you." "Lena, I know it's complicated. I know we had rules, but feelings don't follow contracts." Dante closed the distance between them, reached for her hand. "This is dangerous. If we cross this line, we can't go back." "Maybe I don't want to go back." "You don't know what you're saying. 9 months from now, you'll walk away. You'll start over. You'll be free of all of this." "And what if I don't want to be free of you?" The question was too honest, too vulnerable. It stripped away all the careful distance they'd maintained and laid bare the truth neither of them had wanted to acknowledge. Dante pulled her closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. "If you stay because you feel obligated, because the contract evolved into something that traps you, I'll never forgive myself. And if I stay because I choose to, then I'll spend every day trying to be worth that choice." He kissed her then, and it wasn't like the chaste performance at their wedding. It was real and desperate and full of all the things they'd been holding back for months. Lena melted into it, her hands finding his shoulders, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had started spinning too fast. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back in. "This changes everything," Dante said. "I know. We should talk about it, figure out what this means. Or we could just be, for tonight, without analyzing it to death." He smiled, tired but genuine. "I'm not good at that." "I know, but try anyway." They ended up in the living room, Lena curled on the couch while Dante positioned his wheelchair close enough that they could touch. They talked about nothing important, her worst shifts at the hospital, his most frustrating business meetings, small moments that made up a life. It should have been boring. Instead, it felt like relief. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Lena dozed off mid-sentence. She woke hours later to find herself covered with a blanket, Dante's wheelchair still positioned nearby, his hand resting near hers like even in sleep he'd wanted to maintain the connection. The next few weeks were strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. They stopped pretending the marriage was just business. Dante worked from home more often, finding excuses to be in the same room where Lena was reading or watching television. She started spending evenings in his office,
ostensibly doing her own work, but really just wanting to be near him. Danny noticed the change when she finally convinced him to have dinner with them.
"You're different with him now," he said when Dante stepped away to take a call. "At the wedding, you looked like strangers. Now you look like... Like what?" "Like you actually care about each other." Lena didn't know how to explain that it had crept up on her, that the man she'd married for money had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without. "It's complicated," she said. "That's what you always say when you're hiding something." "I'm not hiding anything." But she was. She was hiding the contract, the original arrangement, the fact that everything Danny was seeing had grown from a foundation of transaction and desperation. She was hiding how terrified she was that this fragile thing they'd built would shatter when the year ended and reality reasserted itself. Dante returned and Danny watched them with new scrutiny. The way Dante's hand found Lena's automatically. The way she leaned slightly toward him without thinking. The easy comfort that had developed between them. "I'm glad you're happy," Danny said before he left. "Even if I don't fully understand how you got here." After he was gone, Dante turned to Lena. "You should tell him the truth." "About what?" "About the contract. About why we really got married." "Why would I do that?" "Because secrets eat away at relationships, and because he deserves to know that you sacrificed for him. He'd hate it. He'd feel guilty. It would destroy our relationship. Or it would make him understand why you're so guarded about this, why you won't talk about your marriage. Secrets are just lies wearing a different name, Lena." The observation stung because it was true, but the thought of telling Danny, of seeing his face when he realized what she'd done, felt impossible. "I can't," she whispered. "Then you're choosing to keep the wall between you. Just make sure you're prepared to live with that choice." That night, alone in her room, Lena pulled out the contract for the first time in months. She read through the clinical language, the specific terms, the exit clause that stipulated she'd receive her full payment upon completion of the 12-month period. 6 months left. Half the agreement completed. She should have felt relief that the end was approaching. Instead, she felt something close to panic. Because somewhere in the past 6 months, Dante Varelli had stopped being just the man paying her to play a role. He'd become someone she looked for when she came home. Someone whose smile made her day better. Someone who saw her, really saw her, in a way no one else ever had. And the contract that had brought them together was about to become the thing that tore them apart. She didn't put the contract away. Instead, she sat on her bed holding it, reading the same clauses over and over until the words blurred together. 12 months. Full payment upon completion. Clean exit for both parties. Everything spelled out in language that left no room for the messy reality of what they'd become. A knock on her door startled her. She shoved the contract under her pillow as Dante appeared in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Just thinking." About? Everything. Nothing. The impossible situation they'd created. But she couldn't say that without opening a conversation neither of them was ready for. "Danny," she said instead, "he's pulling away from me and I don't know how to fix it without telling him everything." Dante moved into the room, stopping near the bed. "You could tell him part of it. That the marriage started as an arrangement but became something real. That's still a lie, just a different one." "Then what do you want to do?" "I don't know. I've been protecting him his whole life. I don't know how to stop." "Maybe you don't protect him by hiding the truth. Maybe you protect him by trusting he can handle it." Lena looked up at him, this man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago and now knew her better than almost anyone. "When did you get so wise about relationships?" "I'm not. I'm terrible at them, but I know what it's like to carry secrets that eat you alive. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." He sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel his warmth. His hand found hers, fingers lacing together in a gesture that had become automatic. "What secrets are you carrying?" she asked quietly. "Too many to count, but the worst one is how much I'm dreading the day this ends." The admission landed between them with devastating honesty. Lena's throat tightened. "We don't have to talk about the end. We still have 6 months. 6 months isn't enough. A year wouldn't be enough. That's the problem." "Dante, I'm falling in love with you." The words came out flat, matter of fact, like he was stating an unavoidable truth rather than making a confession. "I've been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it's just proximity or loneliness or desperation, but it's not. It's you. And when the contract ends and you leave, I don't know how I'm supposed to go back to the life I had before you were in it.
Lena's heart hammered so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. You think I'm leaving? Aren't you? That was the deal. 1 year, then you're free. What if I don't want to be free? You say that now. But when the time comes, when the reality of this life really settles in, you'll see clearly again. You'll remember that you never signed up for forever. Just 12 months. Stop telling me what I'll do. You don't know.
I know you're not built for this world. I know that eventually the violence and the danger and the constant pressure will wear you down. I know that loving me comes with a cost most people aren't willing to pay. Most people aren't me. Dante's hand tightened around hers. That's what scares me. Because you're stubborn enough to stay even when you shouldn't. And I'm selfish enough to let you. Lena pulled him closer, close enough to see the fear beneath his careful control. What if we stopped thinking about the contract? What if we just focused on what we want, not what we agreed to? That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. At least this way we're choosing the danger instead of having it chosen for us. He kissed her then, and it felt like surrender and defiance all at once. They crossed lines they'd been dancing around for weeks, the contract forgotten in favor of something more immediate and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the space between them felt charged with possibility and terror. Stay with me tonight, Dante said. Not in separate wings. Just stay. She did. They fell asleep tangled together on her bed, the contract still hidden under her pillow like a secret neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Morning came too soon. Lena woke to find Dante already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Nothing. Just, this is the first time I've woken up next to someone in years. How does it feel? Terrifying. And right. Mostly terrifying. She laughed despite the weight in her chest. They were in uncharted territory now, no contract clause to guide them through what happened when business became personal. The next few weeks were both easier and harder. Easier because they stopped pretending, stopped maintaining the careful distance that had governed their early months. Harder because the reality of their situation, the contract, the deadline, the uncertainty, hung over everything like a storm cloud waiting to break. Vincent noticed the change at their next business dinner. You two seem different, he observed, studying them over his wine glass. More comfortable with each other. We've been married almost 7 months, Dante said. We'd better be comfortable by now. Indeed, though I notice Lena's still working at the hospital. That's unusual for someone in your position. I like my work, Lena said. It keeps me grounded. Or it keeps you independent, a backup plan perhaps, for when the novelty wears off. The barb was subtle but sharp. Dante's hand found Lena's under the table, a reassurance and a warning. Lena's career has nothing to do with our marriage, Dante said quietly. Of course not. I'm simply noting that she's maintained her own life rather than fully integrating into yours. It suggests a certain tentativeness about the arrangement. It suggests I married an independent woman who doesn't need to define herself through me, Dante countered. I prefer it that way. Vincent smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. How very modern of you, though I wonder what Richard Blackwood makes of it. He's been asking questions again, about the nature of your marriage, about certain financial arrangements that might suggest alternative motivations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lena felt Dante's tension radiating outward like a physical force. What kind of questions? Dante asked. The kind that come from someone who's done his research. He knows about the medical bills, about the sudden influx of money that allowed Danny to move apartments and start college without loans. He's drawing conclusions. Conclusions aren't proof. No, but they're enough to plant doubt. And doubt is a powerful weapon in our world. Lena's stomach twisted. They'd been so careful, but apparently not careful enough. Richard had found the thread and was pulling it to see what unraveled. What does he want? She asked. Vincent's attention shifted to her. The same thing everyone wants: power, territory, control. Your marriage is an obstacle to his expansion plans. If he can prove it's fraudulent, he undermines Dante's stability and creates an opening. So we prove it's real, Lena said. And how do you propose to do that? Love isn't something you can demonstrate in a boardroom. It's felt, not proven. Then we make sure people feel it.
Vincent studied her for a long moment, something like approval flickering across his face. You're more strategic than I gave you credit for. Very well. The charity ball is next month. Every major player in the city will be there. That's your stage. Make them believe and Richard's questions become irrelevant. After Vincent left, Dante sat in silence, jaw tight with frustration. I'm sorry, he said finally. I brought you into this mess. I walked into it willingly. Stop apologizing for things we both chose. You chose money to save your brother. You didn't choose to have your private life dissected by people like Richard Blackwood. No, but I chose you. Everything else is just details. He looked at her with something that might have been wonder. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm. I'm terrified, but falling apart won't help either of us. What will help? Doing exactly what Vincent said, making people believe we're real. We are real. I know, but we need to make sure everyone else knows it too. The charity ball became a focal point, a deadline that felt more significant than it should. Lena found herself preparing for it like it was the performance of her life, which in a way it was. Everything hinged on convincing a room full of cynical, powerful people that her marriage to Dante was genuine. 2 weeks before the event, she came home from a shift to find Dante in his office, staring at his computer with an expression that made her stomach drop. What's wrong? Richard sent me a file. Financial records showing the payments I've made to you. He's threatening to release them publicly if I don't concede territory on the East Side Development Project. Lena moved around the desk, looking at the screen. There it was. Every transaction, every payment laid out in damning detail. That's blackmail. That's business. In his world, they're the same thing. So what do we do? I could give him what he wants. The territory isn't worth the exposure. Or we call his bluff. Make it clear that releasing those records will start a war he's not prepared to fight. And if he releases them anyway? Dante's hands clenched into fists. Then we deal with the fallout. But the damage would be significant. To my reputation, to the organization's stability, to us. The weight of it settled over Lena like a shroud. This was the cost she hadn't fully calculated. Not just the danger of Dante's world, but the constant threat of everything they'd built being torn apart by people who saw their relationship as nothing more than a tactical weakness to exploit. There's a third option, she said quietly. What? We beat him to it. We control the narrative. How? We tell the truth. Our truth. That we started as a business arrangement and became something real. That what we have now is genuine, regardless of how it started. Dante stared at her. That's insane. Admitting the contract existed would confirm everything Richard's been implying. It would also take away his power. He can't threaten to expose something we've already exposed ourselves. And you think people would accept that? That they'd believe we fell in love despite the circumstances? I think our other option is letting Richard control the story, and his version won't have any of the truth that matters. Dante was silent for a long time, processing the implications. Finally, he shook his head. I can't ask you to do that. The public scrutiny, the judgment, it would follow you for years. You're not asking. I'm offering. Lena, I love you. The words came out steady, certain. I didn't plan to. I fought against it for months, but I do. And I'm not going to let Richard Blackwood or anyone else destroy what we've built because we're too afraid to admit how we got here. Something broke in Dante's expression. He pulled her close, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had started crumbling. I love you too, he whispered against her hair. I've been trying not to say it because it felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that the contract stopped mattering months ago. The contract never mattered, not really. It was just the excuse we needed to find each other. They stayed like that for a long time, holding on to each other while the threat of exposure loomed over them. Finally, Dante pulled back enough to meet her eyes. If we're going to do this, we do it right. At the charity ball. In front of everyone. We tell the story on our terms. You're sure? No. But I'm sure about you. That's enough. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation and anxiety. Dante worked with his lawyer to craft a statement that would minimize legal exposure while telling enough truth to diffuse Richard's leverage. Lena practiced her part of the story until it felt natural, until she could talk about their arrangement without flinching. Danny called the night before the ball.
I need to talk to you, he said, in person. She met him at his apartment, dread building with every step. He'd been distant for weeks, and something in his tone suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I know about the contract, he said as soon as she walked in. Lena felt the floor drop out from under her. What? I found something when I was looking up information about Dante's business for a class project. Financial records that showed payments to you, regular, substantial payments that looked like salary, not gifts. I put it together. Danny, you married him for money, to pay my medical bills, to solve problems I created. You didn't create those problems. Leukemia isn't your fault, but you sacrificed yourself because of it. You sold a year of your life to some crime boss so I could go to college debt-free. The anger in his voice was worse than she'd expected, worse than his disappointment or hurt. He was furious. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice. A choice you made because I was drowning us both in debt. How am I supposed to live with that? The same way I lived with watching you almost die. We do what we have to for the people we love. That's not love. That's martyrdom. And I never asked you to martyr yourself for me. Lena's throat tightened. I know you didn't ask, but I couldn't watch you struggle. I couldn't let your future get destroyed because of medical bills. So you destroyed yours instead. I didn't destroy anything. I made a deal that solved our problems. And in the process, I found something I wasn't looking for. What, love? You expect me to believe you actually fell for the guy who bought you? The words hit like a physical blow. Lena stepped back, fighting tears. He didn't buy me. He offered a solution to a problem neither of us could solve alone. And yes, I fell in love with him. Not because I had to, but because he's a good man trapped in a complicated life who saw me as more than just a transaction. That's a nice story. I'm sure it makes the whole thing easier to swallow. It's the truth. The truth is you lied to me for 7 months. You let me think your life was great when really you were playing house with a stranger for money. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Probably the same way it made me feel watching you in that hospital bed, knowing I couldn't afford the treatment that would save you. Danny's anger cracked, revealing the hurt underneath. I would rather have died than have you do this. Well, I wouldn't. I'd rather have you alive and angry with me than dead and gone. If you can't forgive me for that, then I guess we're done here. She left before he could respond, before the tears she'd been holding back could fall where he could see them. She made it to the car before breaking down completely, sobbing until her chest ached and her eyes burned. Her phone rang. Dante. Are you okay? No. The word came out broken. Where are you? Outside Danny's apartment. Stay there. I'm sending the car. I can get myself home. I know you can, but you don't have to. The car arrived 10 minutes later. She climbed in, grateful for the tinted windows that hid her tear-streaked face from the city. Back at the penthouse, she found Dante waiting by the elevator. He took one look at her and opened his arms. She fell into them, letting herself be held while the world felt like it was ending. He knows, she said against his chest. About the contract. He found the financial records. What did he say? That I martyred myself. That he'd rather have died than have me do this. That I lied to him. Dante's arms tightened around her. He's hurt. People say things they don't mean when they're hurt. He meant it, all of it. Then he's wrong. You didn't martyr yourself. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. That's not weakness. That's love. He doesn't see it that way. Then he needs time to see it differently. But Lena, you can't let his anger make you doubt what you did. You saved his life. That matters more than his pride. She wanted to believe that, but the look on Danny's face, the fury and betrayal in his voice, made it hard to see past the damage she'd done by keeping secrets. Tomorrow's the ball, she said. We're supposed to tell everyone the truth, but if Danny can't accept it, how will anyone else? Danny loves you. Eventually he'll understand. The people at that ball don't love either of us, but they respect power and they respond to certainty. If we tell our story with conviction, they'll accept it because the alternative is admitting they were fooled. And if it doesn't work, then we deal with whatever comes next. Together. The certainty in his voice steadied her. She pulled back enough to see his face. I'm scared. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. That night, they didn't sleep apart. Lena curled against Dante's side, listening to his heartbeat, trying to find calm in the rhythm of it. Tomorrow would bring consequences they couldn't predict, but tonight they had each other. And somehow, that was enough. The morning of the charity ball arrived with surreal clarity. Lena went through the motions of getting ready, the dress, the hair, the makeup that transformed her into someone who looked confident enough to face a room full of predators. But underneath the polish, she felt raw and exposed. Dante found her standing by the window, staring out at the city. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "About a dozen. You?" "More than I can count." "So why are we doing this?" "Because the alternative is letting fear make our decisions. And I'm tired of being afraid." She turned to face him, this man who'd started as a transaction and become everything. "What if this ruins us?" "Then we'll find a way to rebuild." "But Lena, we're already ruined if we're living in constant fear of exposure. At least this way we control the narrative." "I wish I had your certainty." "I don't have certainty. I have you. That's better." The car ride to the venue felt too short. Lena's hands shook as they pulled up to the entrance where cameras flashed and people crowded to see who was arriving. Dante took her hand, squeezed once. "Ready?" "No, but let's do it anyway." They entered together, Lena's hand on Dante's shoulder as he maneuvered the wheelchair through the crowd. People turned, whispered, assessed. The weight of their attention was crushing. Richard Blackwood was near the bar, watching their entrance with a smile that made Lena's skin crawl. He raised his glass in a mock toast, the gesture saying everything about his confidence that tonight would end with their exposure and his victory. "Ignore him," Dante murmured. "He's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet." The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. Dinner, speeches, the usual performance of wealth and power. Finally, the moment arrived. Dante had arranged to give a speech after the charity auction, ostensibly to thank donors and supporters. He took the stage with Lena beside him, the microphone amplifying his voice across the ballroom. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity supports causes that matter, and I'm grateful to be part of this community." The usual pleasantries setting up what came next. "But I have something more personal to share. My wife and I have been the subject of speculation since our marriage 7 months ago. Questions about timing, about motivation, about the nature of our relationship." The room went silent, every eye fixed on them. "I'd like to address those questions directly. Lena and I met under unusual circumstances. Our marriage began as a contractual arrangement, a business solution to mutual problems. I needed the appearance of stability after my accident. She needed financial security for her brother's medical care." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lena felt her face burn but kept her expression steady. What started as transaction became something neither of us expected. Somewhere between the contract signing and now, we fell in love. The arrangement that brought us together became irrelevant compared to what we built. Dante's hand found Lena's, holding tight. "I'm sharing this because I refuse to let speculation and rumor define our relationship. Yes, we started unconventionally. Yes, money changed hands. But what we have now is real, messy and complicated and more valuable than any contract could capture." He looked at Lena, and she saw everything in his eyes. Love and fear and hope and determination. "I love my wife, not because I'm paying her to stay, not because it's good for business, but because she sees me, all of me, including the broken parts, and chooses to stay anyway." Lena took the microphone, her voice shaking but clear. "I married Dante because my brother was drowning in medical debt and I was out of options. That's the truth, and I'm not ashamed of it. Desperate people make desperate choices, but I'm staying with him because he's become the person I can't imagine my life without. You can judge that however you want, but our relationship isn't up for your approval." She handed the microphone back, heart hammering. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Then unexpectedly, someone started clapping. Margaret Chen, standing near the back. Others joined slowly, the applause building into something that sounded almost like support. Richard Blackwood stood frozen, his expression caught between rage and disbelief. He'd been outmaneuvered, his leverage destroyed by their willingness to expose themselves before he could. As they left the stage, Dante pulled Lena close. "We did it," he whispered. "Did we? Everyone knows now. The contract, the money, everything. And they're applauding. We took away the power of the secret. That's all that matters." But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The truth was out there now, impossible to take back. And whatever came next, judgment, acceptance, or something in between, they'd have to face it together. Because despite everything, despite the exposure and the risk and the uncertainty, she'd meant every word she said on that stage. She loved him, and that was worth more than any contract, any amount of money, any approval from people who would never understand the impossible choices that had brought them here. The applause faded as they left the stage, but the weight of what they'd done settled heavier with each step. Lena felt exposed in a way she'd never experienced, like they'd stripped naked in front of 500 people and asked to be judged. Some faces in the crowd showed something like respect. Others wore expressions of barely concealed disdain. Most just looked confused, uncertain how to process the confession they'd just witnessed. Richard Blackwood intercepted them before they could escape to a quiet corner. "That was quite a performance," he said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Though I'm not sure it accomplished what you hoped." "It accomplished exactly what we needed," Dante said quietly. "You have no leverage now. The secret's out." "But at what cost?" "You've confirmed every suspicion, admitted to a contract marriage. That doesn't inspire confidence in your leadership, Dante. It makes you look desperate or honest. People respect honesty more than you think." "We'll see." Richard's gaze shifted to Lena. "And you, my dear, you've just announced to the city's elite that you married for money. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." "I can handle consequences," Lena said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Can you handle losing?" Richard's smile tightened. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet." He walked away, leaving them alone in the middle of the ballroom. Around them, conversations had resumed, but Lena could feel the undercurrent. People reassessing, recalibrating, deciding what their confession meant for alliances and power structures she barely understood. "We should leave," Dante said, "before the vultures start circling." They made their exit through a side door, avoiding the main entrance where press had gathered. The car was waiting, and Lena collapsed into the seat, feeling like she'd just run a marathon. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," she said. "You were incredible up there, fearless." "I wasn't fearless. I was terrified. I just didn't let it stop me." Dante took her hand, brought it to his lips. "That's the definition of courage. Being afraid and doing it anyway." Back at the penthouse, the silence felt oppressive. They'd done what they needed to do, said what needed saying, but the aftermath stretched before them like uncertain territory neither knew how to navigate. Lena's phone buzzed, a text from Danny. "I watched the live stream. We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. Danny saw the speech. "And?" "He wants to talk." "That's good, isn't it?" "I don't know. He was so angry before. This might have made it worse. Or it might have made him understand." Lena wanted to believe that, but the memory of Danny's fury, his accusation that she'd martyred herself, was too fresh. She texted back, "Tomorrow. I'll come by." The response came immediately. "Tonight, please." Dante must have seen something in her expression. "Go. Talk to him. I'll be here when you get back." "You're sure?" "He's your brother. You need to fix this." She changed into jeans and a sweater, scrubbing off the makeup that had made her look confident enough to face 500 strangers. The real her, exhausted, scared, uncertain, stared back from the mirror. Danny opened his apartment door before she could knock. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes red-rimmed and hair disheveled. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, "for what I said before, for how I reacted." The apology caught her off guard. "Danny, let me finish. I watched your speech tonight, watched you stand up there and tell the truth even though it cost you. And I realized I've been so focused on my own guilt that I couldn't see what you were actually going through. You don't need to apologize. You had every right to be angry." "No, I didn't. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. You saved my life, Lena, not just from the leukemia, but from the debt that would have destroyed any chance I had at a future. And I threw that back in your face because my pride couldn't handle it." Lena's throat tightened. "I should have told you from the beginning." "Maybe. But I understand why you didn't. You've been protecting me our whole lives. That doesn't just stop because I'm technically an adult." They stood in his doorway, the space between them charged with everything unsaid over the past weeks. I love him, Lena said quietly. I know it started as a transaction, but it's real now. He's real. I could see that tonight. The way you looked at each other up there, that wasn't performance. That was, I don't even know what to call it, but it was real. So where does that leave us? Danny pulled her into a hug, fierce and tight. It leaves us as family. Always. I'm sorry I made you think anything could change that. Lena held on to him, letting tears she'd been holding back finally fall. They stayed like that for a long time, rebuilding what anger and secrets had damaged. Is he good to you? Danny asked when they finally pulled apart. Yeah, he is. Then that's all that matters. Well, that and the fact that if he ever hurts you, I'll find a way to make him regret it despite the whole crime boss thing. She laughed through her tears. Noted. Though I think you'd have to get in line behind several other people with similar plans. They talked for another hour, really talked, in a way they hadn't since before their parents died. Danny asked about Dante, not the business side, but who he was as a person. What made him laugh? How they spent quiet evenings, the small details that made up a life together. Do you think you'll stay? Danny asked. After the year is up? I don't know. We haven't talked about it. Why not? Because I'm scared of the answer. What if he still sees this as temporary? What if the confession tonight was just strategy, not a promise? Then you ask him directly instead of assuming. You're terrible at assumptions, Lena. You always have been. He was right. She'd been avoiding the conversation because addressing it meant facing the possibility that Dante still planned to let her walk away when the contract expired. She drove back to the penthouse with Danny's words circling in her mind. The city lights blurred past the windows, and she thought about all the impossible choices that had led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love she hadn't asked for but couldn't imagine living without. Dante was waiting in the living room, staring out at the city like he always did when something weighed on him. How did it go? He asked without turning. Better than I expected, he apologized. We talked. We're okay. I'm glad. But something in his tone felt off. Lena moved closer, studying his profile in the dim light. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm just thinking. About? The contract. It expires in 5 months. The words hung between them like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. I know. We should talk about it. About what happens when the year is up. Should we? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Or should we just keep pretending we have forever and deal with the end when it comes? Dante finally turned to face her. That's not fair to either of us. We need to be honest about what this is. What is this, Dante? Because I thought after tonight, after we stood up there and told 500 people we love each other, we were on the same page. But you're talking about the contract like it still matters. It does matter. Legally, financially, it all matters. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you still plan to let me walk away when the year ends. The silence stretched too long. When Dante finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I plan to let you make your own choice. Without pressure. Without obligation. That's a lawyer's answer, not a real one. It's the only answer I can give you, because the truth is, I'm terrified that if I ask you to stay, you'll say yes out of some misguided sense of duty. That you'll wake up in 5 years and realize you trapped yourself in a life you never wanted. Stop telling me what I want. You don't get to decide that for me. Then what do you want, Lena? Specifically, because I need to hear it. The question demanded honesty she wasn't sure she was ready to give, but Danny's words echoed in her mind. She was terrible at assumptions. Better to ask directly than to let fear make decisions. I want to tear up the contract, she said. I want to stop counting down the months until this ends. I want to wake up next to you without wondering if this is temporary or real. It is real. Then why are we still talking about contracts and obligations like they mean anything compared to what we actually feel? Dante's hands gripped the wheelchair controls. Because I need to know you're choosing this freely. That you're not staying because you feel trapped or obligated, or because you've convinced yourself you owe me something. I don't feel trapped. I feel like I finally found something worth staying for. Now. But what about 6 months from now? A year? 5 years? When the novelty wears off and you're stuck navigating a world you never asked to be part of? What about you? Lena shot back. What if I stay and then you wake up one day and realize you preferred the version of this that had an expiration date?
That having me here permanently is more complicated than you want to deal with? That's not going to happen. How do you know? Because I've already imagined what it would be like when you leave. I've played out that scenario in my head 1,000 times, and every version ends with me being fundamentally less than I am with you here. So no, I'm not worried about waking up one day and wanting you gone. I'm worried about you waking up one day and realizing you settled for less than you deserve. The raw honesty in his voice broke something open in Lena's chest. They were both terrified, both protecting themselves against future pain by holding back in the present. "We're doing this backwards," she said quietly. "We fell in love, and now we're trying to logic our way out of it." "I'm not trying to logic my way out of anything. I'm trying to make sure you have real choice." "Then give me the choice. Actually ask me what I want instead of assuming you know." Dante moved closer, close enough that she could see the fear beneath his careful control. "What do you want, Lena?" "I want you. Not the contract, not the money, not the security. Just you. Messy and complicated and imperfect. I want to fight with you and make up with you and build something that doesn't have an expiration date stamped on it. Even knowing what my world entails, the danger, the violence, the constant pressure, I'm not naive enough to think it'll be easy, but I'm stubborn enough to think it's worth it. You're sure?" "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." Dante reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded document. Lena recognized it immediately, the contract that had brought them together, now worn from being carried around. He held it out to her. "Then tear it up, make it official." Her hand shook as she took it. All those careful clauses, all that legal language that had defined their relationship for 8 months. She looked at Dante, saw the hope and fear warring in his expression. She tore the contract in half, then in half again. The pieces fluttered to the floor like snow. "We're not doing this because of paperwork," she said. "We're doing this because we choose it, every day. That's the only contract that matters." Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I love you, not because of what you do for my public image or how you help maintain stability. I love you because you see me as human first and everything else second." "I love you too. Even though you're terrible at accepting help, and you work too hard, and you think you have to carry everything alone. I'm working on that. I know. I'll keep reminding you anyway." They stayed like that while torn pieces of contract lay scattered around them, physical evidence that they'd moved beyond transaction into something that couldn't be reduced to legal terms. The next morning brought unexpected consequences. The confession at the charity ball had gone viral. Video clips circulating on social media, news outlets picking up the story, think pieces about contract marriages and modern relationships flooding the internet. Lena's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from reporters requesting interviews. "This is insane," she said, scrolling through her notifications. "People I haven't talked to in 10 years are reaching out to ask about our marriage. Welcome to life under scrutiny. It gets easier." "Does it? Or do you just get better at ignoring it?" "Both, probably." Vincent called that afternoon requesting a meeting. He arrived at the penthouse looking more serious than usual, a leather folder tucked under his arm. "The board is concerned," he said without preamble. "Your confession has created complications." "What kind of complications?" Dante asked. "The kind where people question whether personal revelations should override business considerations. Several members feel you've damaged the organization's reputation by admitting the marriage was transactional. And the rest? Think you've strengthened your position by demonstrating honesty and refusing to be blackmailed. The vote is split." "So what happens now?" Vincent opened the folder, revealing documents Lena didn't understand. "There's going to be a formal review, questions about your fitness to continue leading. Richard Blackwood is pushing hard, using your confession as evidence that you're not stable enough to maintain control. He's grasping at straws. Maybe, but straws can be enough if there are enough of them. You need to shore up support, prove that the marriage, contract or not, hasn't compromised your judgment." "How do we do that?" Lena asked. Vincent's gaze shifted to her. "By demonstrating that you're an asset, not a liability. You've been working at the hospital, maintaining your own life. That independence actually plays well. It suggests you're not just here for money or position." "I'm not." "Then make that clear. To everyone who matters. Show them that this relationship, however it started, has become genuine."
After Vincent left, Dante sat in silence, processing the implications.
I'm sorry, Lena said. This is my fault. If I hadn't pushed for the confession, don't. We made that choice together. And it was the right one, even if it created complications. Richard's not going to stop, is he? No, he'll keep pushing until he either wins or gets pushed back hard enough to reconsider. So what do we do? Dante's expression hardened into something Lena recognized, the face he wore when making difficult decisions. We fight, but not the way Richard expects. He's counting on us being defensive, apologetic. Instead, we go on offense. How? By being so undeniably united that questioning our relationship becomes questioning his judgment. By making it clear that attacking you means attacking me. By showing the board that I'm more effective with you beside me than I ever was alone. It was strategy, cold and calculated. But beneath it, Lena heard something else, determination to protect what they'd built, regardless of cost. The formal review happened 2 weeks later in a conference room Lena had never seen, buried deep in a building she didn't recognize. Dante insisted she attend, despite her protests that this was his business, not hers. You're part of this now, he said, whether you want to be or not. The board was 15 people, mostly men, all with the kind of weathered faces that suggested they'd seen things that would break normal people. Richard Blackwood sat at the far end, his expression smug. Dante presented his case methodically, financial reports showing improved performance over the past 8 months, security assessments demonstrating stable leadership, testimonials from key allies about his continued effectiveness. Then he surprised everyone by calling Lena to speak. My wife has been characterized as a liability, Dante said. I'd like her to address that directly. Lena stood on shaking legs, facing 15 pairs of eyes that assessed her like she was a problem to be solved. I married Dante because I needed money to save my brother, she said, forcing her voice steady. That's not a secret anymore. But what's also true is that in the past 8 months, I've watched him navigate impossible situations with intelligence and integrity. I've seen him make hard choices that prioritize people over profit. I've watched him rebuild after an injury that would have destroyed most people. She paused, meeting Richard's gaze directly. Some of you think I'm a distraction, that our relationship compromises his judgment, but I've never asked him to choose between me and his responsibilities. I've supported every decision he's made, even when I didn't understand it. And I'll continue to do that, whether you approve of our marriage or not. The question isn't whether you support him, Richard interjected. It's whether your presence creates vulnerability. Emotional attachment can be exploited. Everything can be exploited, Lena shot back. Family, loyalty, ambition, all of it. But you don't build strength by eliminating every possible weakness. You build it by making sure the things that matter are worth protecting. Very poetic. But in our world, poetry doesn't stop bullets. No, but commitment does. When people know you'll fight for what you love, they think twice about attacking it. The room was silent. Vincent was watching her with something that might have been approval. Dante's hand found hers under the table, squeezed once. The vote happened in private. Dante and Lena waited in a smaller room, tension thick enough to choke on. That was risky, Dante said, talking back to Richard like that. He was being condescending. I don't respond well to condescension. I noticed. It was impressive. Was it stupid? Probably, but also exactly what they needed to hear. Vincent emerged an hour later, his expression neutral. The vote was 10-5 in your favor. You maintained leadership, subject to quarterly reviews over the next year. Dante's relief was visible. And Richard? Has been censured for attempting to exploit personal information for business gain. He's lost considerable standing. After Vincent left, Dante pulled Lena close, burying his face in her hair. You were incredible in there, he murmured. I was terrified. You didn't show it. Neither did you. We're good at that. Pretending we're not scared while everything falls apart around us. Maybe that's our superpower, being terrified and doing it anyway. The months that followed were strange and difficult and surprisingly wonderful. The public scrutiny faded gradually as other scandals captured attention. Danny visited regularly, building a tentative relationship with Dante that was awkward at first but slowly became genuine. Lena kept her hospital shifts, finding balance between the two worlds she occupied. There were hard days when Dante's pain was overwhelming and his frustration made him sharp-edged and difficult.
Days when Lena questioned whether she was strong enough for this life. Days when the violence of Dante's world touched too close and she had to reconcile the man she loved with the business he ran. But there were good days, too. Quiet mornings drinking coffee while the city woke up. Late nights talking about everything and nothing. Moments of unexpected tenderness that reminded her why she'd chosen this complicated, imperfect life. The one-year anniversary of their wedding arrived with less fanfare than Lena expected. She woke to find Dante already awake beside her, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "A year ago today, I married a stranger for strategic reasons. I thought I was solving a problem. And now? Now I'm married to the person who makes my life make sense. Turns out I was solving a completely different problem than I thought." Lena smiled, reaching for his hand. "We're both terrible at knowing what we actually need. Lucky we found each other anyway." That evening, Dante surprised her by suggesting they go back to where they'd had their wedding. The Meridian Hotel had the same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, but walking through it felt completely different than it had a year ago. "Why are we here?" Lena asked. "Because I want to do something I should have done the first time." He led her to a small private room she didn't recognize. Inside, Danny was waiting, along with Vincent and Margaret Chen and a few other people who'd become part of their strange extended family. "What is this?" "A do-over," Dante said. "The first wedding was a contract signing. This is the real thing." There was an officiant, flowers, music, nothing elaborate, but everything meaningful. And when Dante took her hands and spoke vows he'd written himself, promising to love her through pain and difficulty, to choose her every day regardless of contracts or obligations, Lena felt tears streaming down her face. "I didn't prepare anything," she said. "Then just tell me the truth. I love you. I choose you. Every complicated, difficult, wonderful part of this. That's my vow. That's enough." They kissed while their small audience applauded, and Lena thought about all the impossible choices that had led to this moment. The desperation that had made her agree to marry a stranger. The gradual unraveling of careful distance. The moment when transaction had become something neither of them could name, but both recognized as real. Months turned into a year, then 2. The contract that had brought them together became a story they told at dinner parties, evidence of how strangely life worked when you stopped trying to control it. Richard Blackwood eventually overreached on a different matter and lost his position entirely. Danny graduated college, started working at a nonprofit, occasionally reminded Lena that he'd forgive her for the contract, but never let her forget it. Dante's organization stabilized under his continued leadership. The wheelchair became less a symbol of weakness and more just another fact of his life, something he'd adapted to with the same determination he applied to everything else. He and Lena found rhythms that worked, learned to navigate the complicated intersection of his world and hers. There were still hard days, still moments when the violence or danger felt overwhelming, still times when Lena questioned whether she was strong enough for this life she'd chosen. But there were more good days than bad. More moments of unexpected joy than anticipated pain, more evidence that the impossible choice she'd made to marry a stranger for money had somehow led to the most real thing in her life. 3 years after their contract wedding, Lena found Dante in his usual spot by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Marcus Chen. He died trying to deliver a message about a contract. I've been thinking about how strange it is that his death led to us." "Life's full of strange connections like that." "I know, but sometimes I wonder what he'd think, if he'd approve of how it all turned out. I think he'd be glad his last act led to something real, that his loyalty to you created something worth more than whatever contract he was protecting." Dante pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "I used to think contracts were the only things you could trust, that everything else was too unpredictable, too messy. Then you came along and proved that the mess is the point, that real trust isn't built on paper. It's built on choosing someone every day, even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," Lena corrected. "Especially then." They sat together watching the city lights, and Lena thought about all the ways life surprised you when you stopped trying to control it. She'd married for money and found love. She'd agreed to a year and built a lifetime. She'd thought she was solving a problem and instead discovered that sometimes the best things come from making impossible choices for the right reasons. There was no perfect ending to their story. No moment when everything resolved cleanly and all problems disappeared. Dante's world was still dangerous. Lena still struggled with the moral complexities of being married to someone whose business operated in shadows. Danny still worried about her, still questioned whether she'd really chosen freely or just convinced herself she had. But perfection had never been the point. The point was choosing each other, despite the imperfections. Building something real from a foundation of pretense. Turning a contract into a commitment that meant more than any legal document could capture. And if there was a lesson in their story, it was this. Sometimes the most transactional beginnings lead to the most genuine connections. Sometimes you have to start by lying to find your way to truth. Sometimes love sneaks up on you disguised as a business arrangement, and by the time you recognize it for what it is, you're already in too deep to walk away. Not that Lena would have walked away even if she could, because Dante was right. She'd found something in this impossible situation that she'd never found anywhere else. Not just love, though it was that, but also understanding, partnership. The strange comfort of being known completely by someone who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. 3 years after signing a contract that was supposed to last one, Lena Carter Varelli stood beside her husband watching the city they'd both fought to make peace with. She thought about the nurse who'd been too exhausted to imagine her life changing, about the mafia boss who'd thought stability could be bought with money and contracts, about all the ways they'd been wrong and all the ways they'd found their way to something better than either had planned. No regrets? Dante asked, reading her thoughts the way he'd learned to do. Too many to count, Lena said honestly. But none about this. About us. Same. Pa. And it was enough. Not perfect, not simple, not anything like the fairy tale ending people expected from love stories, but real in a way that mattered more than perfection ever could. Because in the end, that's what love was. Not the absence of complications, but the willingness to navigate them together. Not a contract with clear terms and expiration dates, but a daily choice to stay even when leaving would be easier. Not a solution to problems, but the courage to face them side by side. They'd started as a transaction and become something neither had words for. And if Lena had learned anything in the 3 years since Marcus Chen had died in her emergency room with Dante's name on his lips, it was that the best things in life couldn't be contracted for, bargained over, or reduced to terms and conditions. They had to be chosen, every single day, in all their messy, imperfect, complicated glory. And that, more than any amount of money or security or carefully negotiated agreement, was worth everything she'd risked to find it.